dosent, we have a national emergency.
This is one of the things that we can shoot first and ask questions later. Normally you can't do that.
All of a sudden these trees started moving out of the way. They parted for me. And then I came out into this opening, and there where I saw Jesus Christ.
Back in 1927, an American socialist, Norman Thomas, 6 times candidate for president on the Socialist Party ticket, said the American people would never vote for socialism. But he said under the name of liberalism, the American people will adopt every fragment of the socialist program. He is more imminent.
James Madison, in 1788, speaking to the Virginia Convention, said, "Since the general civilization of mankind, I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachment of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations."
When men were free.
Broadcasting live from a secret location buried deep below the earth, you're about to make a connection to the signs of the times. W. Dean Shook is live on the air right now.
Welcome into End Time News. I am your humbled host, W. Dean Shook. I am proud and privileged to be able to be with you. You know, instead of broadcasting the news today, we're going to honor Black History Month by giving you some history that is not very pretty. Some of you, this may be very hard to listen to. For others, this may be very enlightening. But before we get started, I'd like to announce a new mobile app for End Time News. It's available on Google Play for iPhone and for Android. It's a free download. I have to say it's only been up about 3 days, and already we have gone from number 378 to number 47 because people are downloading it by the thousands. It's a free download. You can get it in the Google Play Store. Get your mobile app today and never miss another episode of End Time News. You can hear us anytime, anywhere. Well, like I said, this is going to be a hard program for some people to listen to, because there's a dark and sinister history that began around 100 years ago. It started out as a pimple on the buttocks of America. Today, it's grown to a cancer of death and racism that's consuming the lives of a population that probably doesn't fully understand this consuming disease. It started out under the guise of social justice, and it's turned into the elimination of millions of lives. For the African American population, this has been and still is a silent killer, and it grows and flourishes to this very day. Now, in order to fully understand this plague, we need to understand its beginnings. So the first half of the show will be on the history of this genocide that's perpetrated on the minority population, and the second half of the show will be on how it's blossomed into the killing machine that it is today. And it is a very efficient killing machine. So let's get an understanding of how this whole thing started. This is a history of the eugenics idea that promoted population control policies. It included sterilization and race improvement through selective breedings. These are also the central ideas of the Nazi Party in Germany. Eugenicists at the beginning of the 20th century didn't support birth control. They believed that contraception would reduce the birth rate among the upper and middle classes. And this was a bad thing, as these superior people wouldn't reproduce themselves. Well, in the 1920s, the eugenicist position included birth control for the lower classes, which included sterilization of idiots, immigration restrictions to improve the white race. Well, in 1954, Hugh Moore published a pamphlet. It was called The Population Explosion, which predicted an immediate economic crisis caused by global overpopulation. Moore worked with Planned Parenthood, but he split with them over the adoption of women's rights as the leading strategy for population control. Now let me say that again. He split with them because Planned Parenthood adopted women's rights as the leading strategy for population control. More wanted to dispense with all rights and force everyone to comply with mandatory population control policies. Federal funding for contraception and abortion began under the administration of Lyndon Johnson, while by 1997, state and federal funding for family planning reached $700 million annually. Now, initially, the movement for family planning came from the belief in overpopulation. But the feminists joined the overpopulation believers and redefined birth control and abortion as an issue of women's rights rather than methods of world population reduction. The first organizers of the anti-population movement were the Ford Foundation and the Population Council, the Population Crisis Committee, and Planned Parenthood. The pivotal figure in this movement was John D. Rockefeller III. He was the grandson of John D. Rockefeller. Now, the third organized the Population Council in 1952, and this was to train demographers to study world population. Promoted as neutral scientific organization, the Population Council actually consisted of experts who shared a common goal of reducing the world's population. The population control came out of the post-war movement for one world government. Hugh Moore and William Voigt of Planned Parenthood were the leading population control lobbyists around the world. Alan Gutmuncher and Cass Canfield of Planned Parenthood were also devoted to world population control. These leaders were supported by social scientists who believed that controlling population would promote economic growth and economic stability. They also said it would alleviate poverty, reduce crime and pollution, and ease the management of the welfare state. However, these quality-of-life values are simply soft liberal ideas. No research had been done studying causal relations between population growth and economy, crime, pollution, or any other objectives when the population reduction agenda became policy. In other words, these were simple, nice-sounding excuses to reduce population. Lyndon Johnson linked family planning with the war on poverty. One of the key events of his administration was the Social Security Amendments of 1967 that was proposed by Congressman George Bush of Texas and Herman Schiavelli of Pennsylvania, which allowed the federal government to fund programs through state agencies and private organizations. The system that emerged was led by Planned Parenthood, the Population Council, and the Ford Foundation, who created demonstrated programs as models. These models were then funded by the U.S. government as well as by private foundations and UN agencies. In 1974, the United Nations held a World Population Conference in Bucharest. Following the conference, the Population Council endorsed abortion as a birth control measure. This position was not exactly new, as Planned Parenthood and Hugh Moore had been attempting to revise anti-abortion laws for over a decade. Planned Parenthood had consistently promoted sterilization and abortion as family planning. John Rockefeller focused on abortion rights and sex education after Bucharest and placed these issues under the terms women's rights. Rockefeller had embraced homosexual rights as part of this program, because the truth is, women's rights and homosexual rights are fronts for the world population reduction. The leaders of the population control movement consisted of a small number of wealthy progressive elitists, but the new propaganda movement to make abortion a legal and acceptable form of family planning aroused political opposition, mainly from Catholic Church and black organizations, as it probably should have. The population control movement succeeded in enlisting the UN and various government agencies around the world in a wide network of sex education and contraceptive programs. And by 1990, about half of the couples in the world were using birth control. About 80% of the couples in the United States were using birth control. World population began to decline in the 1960s, and the number of persons living in poverty declined significantly in the United States, just as the program designed to address these problems was adopted. However, The number of out-of-wedlock births rose dramatically beginning in the 70s. The population control switched their justification for government policies that promoted contraception and abortion away from the rhetoric of world population crisis to sex education for teenagers in the United States. The vast majority of Americans accepted contraception by the 70s. The population control activists were pro-feminists, pro-sexual revolution, and pro-homosexual, and attempted to lobby the federal government to support their belief in the reorganization of society by promoting promiscuity and undermining marriage. William Voigt was author of Road to Survival in 1948, which framed world overpopulation as an environmental issue. Voigt emphasized world peace, environmentalism, Malthusianism, and individual rights to practice birth control. Voigt favored paying the poor to be sterilized in order to eliminate their genes from the reproductive gene pool and to reduce the social cost of poverty and crime. Rockefeller's population control was formed under the auspices of National Academy of Science from a Rockefeller grant. One of the arguments in favor of population control put forth the leading scientist that was to evaluate defective genes and isolate high-quality genes. Louis Stadler, a member of the early planning group, believed the modern civilization had replaced natural selection by enabling weaker persons to reproduce. The early policy statement of the Population Council included encouraging smarter people to have more children. Well, inside the Rockefeller family, Nelson argued against John Dee's position as likely to arouse political opposition, but John Dee promised to promote the Population Council as a neutral scientific body so it would gain credibility. Well, Rockefeller also avoided overt leadership to avoid having the Rockefeller family named directly attacked for pursuing anti-human policies. Well, funded by the Rockefeller Fund, the Ford Foundation, and other nonprofit organizations, the Population Council became the leading think tank proposing population control programs. This included funding scholars of demography around the world and at the leading universities in the United States. These early demographers transformed demographics into a policy-oriented science. The initial demography graduates became a technical elite, and they provided guidance to population control programs around the world. The policy aim of the Population Council was first to reduce birth rates around the world and then to focus on the problem of population quality. Well, the Population Council established a population control program in South Korea, Pakistan, Malaysia, Barbados, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Tunisia, Thailand, and the United Arab Republic. And by 1968, the Population Council had programs in over 50 nations, mainly promoting insertion of the IUD to prevent births. Now, Rockefeller believed that these early efforts were ineffective and amounted mainly to propaganda. He was anxious to expand the population control in the United States. He then hired Bernard Burleson to take control over communications back in 1962. Burleson believed that social science could be brought to bear to convince people to use birth control and to be sterilized and to influence government to fund family planning programs. Burleson personally believed in sterilization after the third or fourth child, but this idea never caught on in the United States. Even though sterilization was, however, aggressively pursued in foreign countries. Rockefeller also recruited medical specialists and financed their research into birth control. Among his recruits were Alan F. Guttmuncher, later president of Planned Parenthood. Eventually, their research efforts resulted in the formation of Rockefeller University and the birth control pill. At the end of the war, Clarence Gamble, heir to the Procter & Gamble fortune, was instrumental in establishing birth control programs in West Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, Puerto Rico. Swedish socialist Gunnar Myrdal wrote that these programs were designed to lower the number of Negroes in the South. Puerto Rico had been the location of birth control efforts since 1925, when Jose Rollin, a communist, organized the Birth Control League. In 1932, a physician named Cornelius Rhodes and San Juan's Presbyterian Hospital, working under a Rockefeller Foundation grant, wrote a letter which was published in San Juan newspaper. Rhodes wrote that the Puerto Ricans are beyond doubt the direst, laziest, most degenerate and thievius race of men ever inhabiting this sphere. What the island needs is not public health work, but a tidal wave or something to totally exterminate the population. Puerto Ricans then organized groups opposed to birth control. Eleanor Roosevelt urged Surgeon General Thomas Perrin to promote contraceptive programs so that births could be spaced and Puerto Rico women could not lose work due to unwanted pregnancies. The linking of contraception to health care was the way the federal government was brought into the population control movement. To counteract the effort of growing populations due to better health control systems and conditions, the population controllers wanted birth control programs. Now, at the end of the Eisenhower administration, this program was internationalized under U.S. foreign aid programs. Hubert Humphrey, Stuart Symington, and Adlai Stevenson were among the U.S. Democrats who supported efforts to promote birth control through foreign aid. They were joined by the Unitarian Fellowship and other Protestant groups and Planned Parenthood. Eisenhower would not publicly support their approach, however. Under Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs, family planning came under the Office of Economic Opportunity, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. As the divorce rate ran out of wedlock, birth rates began to skyrocket in the 60s. The population control advocates began to link contraception with having fewer children as a cure for poverty. Welfare advocates then came to support family planning as a means of keeping the cost of welfare programs down. Lyndon Johnson allowed existing agencies such as the USAID and HEW and the OEO to expand family planning efforts without any legislative authorization, which is how U.S. control over world population programs maintained secrecy. About 1969, the OEO had expanded the support 160 family planning programs in 36 states through the formation of a comprehensive neighborhood health centers. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. In 1967, Congress passed legislation mandating that states carry out family planning programs. This legislation was hidden in the Social Security legislation amendments and thus went largely unnoticed by opponents of family planning and the press. The Johnson administration initiated high-level meetings that included the Bureau of the Budget, the State Department, and other population control experts. Called the Never Never Committee, this group concluded that supplying contraception to single mothers was the best method for controlling population. But the program had to be delayed until popular acceptance could be assured. Then the Johnson administration conceived of family planning as part of their Great Society welfare state, but they didn't want to publicize an official program and inflame public opinion. The population control movement moved to influence popular opinions in the 60s by flooding magazines for women with articles extolling the benefits of birth control and the dangers of world population crisis. Novelists also took up the subject. They portrayed future societies as overpopulated and reduced the mass cannibalism and forced practice of euthanasia. Logan's Run and Soylent Green were two of the most popular novels. In 1968, Paul Ehrlich published The Population Bomb, which became a bestseller. Ehrlich predicted mass famines in the 70s if populations were not controlled. Ehrlich advocated adding sterilants to the water supply and forbidding couples to have more than 2 children. He also proposed taxing children at a higher taxes on children's goods. Childless couples and sterilized men could receive government payments. Ehrlich was instrumental in forming the zero population growth movement. While black Muslims denounced family planning as a plot against blacks around the world, But the Urban League and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference endorsed federally funded family planning. One militant black group on the West Coast called EROS equated the birth control bill with a noose and warned of plots to depopulate black Americans. And in order to diffuse Catholic opposition, the Ford Foundation sponsored a series of meetings on population at the University of Notre Dame from 1963 to 67. These meetings helped to form a birth control faction among liberal Catholics and split support away from the natural family planning method. In 1965, over 30 states had family planning services, but these were limited to married women. However, the Federal Office of Education funded over 600 projects devoted to sex education. The federal government supplied contraceptives to military personnel and Native Americans. Private organizations, such as Planned Parenthood, were prohibited from receiving government funds. It wasn't until 1967 Social Security Administration that federal funds were dispensed to Planned Parenthood, and states receiving federal welfare grants were required to establish family planning clinics. In 1960s, 23% of black children were illegitimate and 3% of white children were illegitimate. The present illegitimacy rate is about 70% for blacks and 40% for whites. In 1967, John D. Rockefeller organized a worldwide population control conference. He gathered signatures from 30 world leaders, including Lyndon Johnson, on a statement of population control policy for the world. The Soviet Union denounced this policy as neo-Malthusianism. But zero population growth called for a radical reduction in world population growth. Ulrich linked population growth and pollution and a threat to natural resources, and George Bush formed a committee task force on Earth resources and population that promoted federal family planning. As President Nixon took office, he designated overpopulation as a great threat to the world. Nixon believed that overpopulation threatened quality of education, living space, and democracy. Out of Nixon's administration came the Family Planning Services and Population Research Act of 1970 and the Commission on Population Growth and the American Future. Family planning legislation was supported with $382 million in federal funds. These new measures had bipartisan support and little public opposition. In 1971, the budget was increased to $573 million. The act authorized new contraceptive programs for the mentally challenged, the poor, Cuban refugees, Native American, Alaskan Natives, and migrant workers. So this is just a little bit of the history about how this whole thing got started. I'm going to take a short break here, but when I come back, we're going to expose the killing machine that these ideas have become today. You're listening to End Time News. I'll be right back.
Given the admiration that Adolf Hitler expressed for the American eugenics movement, it is not unlikely that he modeled the eugenics courts in Nazi Germany after the state eugenics boards in the U.S. In both countries, feeble-mindedness was routinely used as a catch-all justification for sterilization, and the diagnosis of feeble-mindedness was almost always left up to the judgment of the person advocating the sterilization.
During the 4 months that American Birth Control League director Lothrop Stoddard was in Nazi Germany, he not only met with Hitler and SS chief Heinrich Himmler, he also attended one of the Nazi eugenics courts.
The first case I saw looked like an excellent candidate for sterilization. A man in his mid-30s. He was rather ape-like in appearance. Receding forehead, flat nose with flaring nostrils, thick lips, and heavy prognathous jaw. Not vicious looking, but gross and rather dull. Lothrop Stoddard, Director, American Birth Control League, later known as Planned Parenthood.
From its beginning, Planned Parenthood always had powerful ties to the American eugenics community. In fact, in many places they were often one and the same. For example, when the first birth control clinic was opened in Arkansas, it was operated by the Arkansas Eugenics Association and overseen by a woman named Hilda Cornish. Later, the Arkansas Eugenics Association would become the Arkansas state affiliate of Planned Parenthood. and Cornish would be named its executive director.
Hi folks, have you noticed the federal government and police departments are using drones for everything? Drones are expensive. They're hard to fly. It can take up to a week just to learn to make a drone hover. Not anymore. There's a new generation of drones that are not only affordable but very easy to fly. Now you can have your own personal drone, anything from a micro mini that'll fit in the palm of your hand, right up to a full-scale model, 10 inches in diameter like the model I have, the V949 Pro. Comes with a 6-axis, 4-rotor blade, and an HD 2.4 camera mounted on the bottom. These drones are made of a space-age polymer. They're durable, and don't worry about crashing your drone. Replacement blades for this drone from the website are only $1.80 for a pack of 4. That's right, I said $1.80 for a pack of 4 replacement blades. You can also get an extra long life battery. This battery allows you up to a half hour of flight time with a maximum speed of 40 miles an hour. Have your own personal drone, and you can get all of this for under $70. If you go to the website, wdeanshook.com, and click on the banner on the webpage, you can get from 7 to 22% off your personal drone. It's shipped as a kit. You can be up and flying your own personal drone with an HD camera within a half hour. Come to the webpage, wdeanshook.com. Click on that banner and get your discount today. wdeanshook.com.
Perhaps the biggest war against our liberties is the war being waged against those that are not here today, the unborn. Besides slavery, abortion is the other darkest stain on our nation's character. And this president is looking for every way possible to make abortion more available and more frequent. And he wants you to pay for it, even if you disagree with it. Welcome to another provision of Obamacare. Like the pro-slavery forces who invaded Kansas, the pro-abortion forces in Washington and elsewhere want us to believe that abortion is not murder, that being born is worse than death, that the unborn baby is property, not a person. We've heard that before, 150 years ago. And not shockingly, we see this administration opposing any reductions in taxpayer-funded funding to the one private corporation, the largest abortion business in the entire country, Planned Parenthood, who would not allow any single reductions, more than $300 million tax dollars to this entity. And ladies and gentlemen, I am the adopted father of 4 children. Each of them either black, Hispanic, Native American. And I am incensed that this president pays money to an entity that was created for the sole purpose of killing children that look like mine. A racist organization, and it continues specifically to target minorities for abortion destruction. Shame on this president, and shame on that party.
Now, you have a source for the truth in the news. W. Dean Shook, End Time News. Your connection to the signs of the times.
All right, thank you for allowing me that break. I appreciate it so very much. And here is how the modern-day killing machine was built, and I'll show you how effectively it works today. Let's start with the history of the modern-day killing machine by letting me introduce you to a girl whose name is Margaret. She was born September 4th, 1879. She was born Margaret Higgins in Corning, New York, to Michael Hennessy Higgins, an Irish-born freethinker who eked out a meager living as a stonemason, and Anne Purcell Higgins, a hard-working, devoted Roman Catholic Irish-American. Margaret, one of 12 children, was also haunted by her mother's premature death, which Margaret attributed to the rigors of frequent childbirth and poverty. Being determined to escape a similar fate, Margaret Higgins, supported by her 2 older sisters, attended Claverick College and Houston River Institute before she enrolled in White Plains Hospital as a nurse practitioner in 1900. She was a practical nurse in the women's ward, working toward her registered nursing degree when her 1902 marriage to architect William Sanger ended her formal training. From then on, she would be known as Margaret Sanger. She had 3 children, settled down to a quiet life in Westchester, New York. In an effort to salvage her troubled marriage, the Sangers abandoned their suburbs for life in New York City. For Margaret, no longer known as Margaret Higgins, now married, is known as Margaret Sanger, founded in New York. The radical activism and bohemian culture that permeated New York in the pre-war years created a formidable educational environment. She recalled saying, "Our living room became a gathering place where liberals, anarchists, and socialists could meet." Exposed to modernist notions of political, social, and personal revolution, Sanger discovered the ideological justifications and practical outlets for her rebellious and unconventionality. She joined the Women's Committee in the New York City Socialist Party and participated in several labor actions undertaken by the industrial workers of the world, including the 1912 strike of textile works at Lawrence, Massachusetts. And Sanger's emerging feminist socialist interest, coupled with her nursing background, led in 1912 to an invitation to write What Every Schoolgirl Should Know. This was a column on female sexuality and social hygiene for the New York Call. The series quickly drew the attention of postal authorities, which in 1913 banned her article on venereal disease as obscene. Sanger's general interest in sex education and women's health soon focused on family limitation. Returning to work as a visiting nurse among the immigrants of New York City's Lower East Side, she saw graphic examples of the tolls taken by frequent childbirth, miscarriage, and self-induced abortion. With access to contraceptive information prohibited on grounds of obscenity by 1873 federal Comstock law and a host of state laws, Sanger realized the poor women didn't have the same freedom from the physical hardship, the fear and dependency that's inherent in unwanted pregnancies, as did those radical middle-class women who were espousing sexual liberation. Will awaken to the connection between contraceptive and working-class empowerment by anarchist feminist Emma Goldman, Sanger became convinced that liberating women from the risk of unwanted pregnancy would effect fundamental social change. With other feminists espousing family limitation through sexual abstinence and socialists unwilling to be distracted by a fight for birth control, Sanger launched her own campaign, challenging governmental censorship of contraceptive information by embarking on a series of law-defying, controversial actions designed to force birth control into the center of public debate. In March 1914, Sanger began publishing The Woman Rebel. It was a radical feminist monthly that advocated militant action on the right of every woman to be absolute mistress of her own body. The educational, economical, and political equality espoused by most feminists were irrelevant. Sanger declared that unless some women first had the means to avoid the burden of unwanted pregnancies, only birth control, a term coined by the woman rebel, would free women from the tyranny of uncontrolled birth control. Although she did little more than espouse birth control in The Woman Rebel, postal authorities suppressed 5 of its 7 issues. Sanger defied the authorities by continuing publications while preparing her next salvo against the obscenity law, family limitations, a 16-page pamphlet containing the most precise evaluations and graphic descriptions of various contraceptive methods then available to American women, while in August of 1914, Margaret Sanger was indicted for violating postal obscenity laws in The Woman Rebel, and unwilling to risk imprisonment, she jumped bail in October and, using the alias Bertha Watson, set sail for England via Canada, and en route she ordered the release of family limitation. A few weeks later, William Sanger was tricked into providing a copy of the pamphlet to an operative and a crusader, Anthony Comstock, and went to jail for 30 days. This escalated interest in birth control as a civil liberties issue. Well, Margaret Sanger spent much of 1914 exiled in England, where contact with British neo-Malthusiasts helped refine her social economic justification for birth control. She was also profoundly influenced by the liberation theories of British sexual theorist Havelock Ellis. Under his guidance, she formulated a new rationale that would liberate women not just from making sexual intercourse safe, but also pleasurable. It would, in effect, free women from the inequality of the sexual experience. In these years, Sanger also set about ordering her personal life in accordance with her beliefs in sexual freedom and the empowerment of women. Her abrupt 1914 departure effectively ended her already rocky marriage to William Sanger. She embarked on a series of romantic liaisons with men, including Havelock Ellis and H.G. Wells. In 1922, she married wealthy oil producer James Slee, but it was a marriage on her own terms. Now, even though she was fond of Slee, she accepted his proposal only after he agreed to accept her demand for personal autonomy. He also promised to provide support for the birth control movement. Well, in a piece called A Plan for Peace in 1932, Sanger proposed a population congress and said the main objective of the population congress would be to apply a stern and rigid policy of sterilization and segregation to the grade of populations whose progeny is tainted or whose inheritance is such that objectionable traits may be transmitted to offspring. Well, Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, started the Negro Project in 1939, said it was a collaborative effort between the American Birth Control League and Sanger's Birth Control Clinic Research Bureau. For a eugenicist, it wasn't controversial. It was integral to the implementation of eugenics to eliminate the unfit, quote-unquote. Eugenics is a science that deals with the improvement, as by control of human mating, and hereditary qualities of race or breed. Negative eugenics focused on preventing the birth of those it considered inferior or unfit. This was the foundation of Sanger's birth control policies and advocated throughout her writings, her speeches, and her periodicals, including Pivot of Civilization and Plan for Peace, and countless birth control review articles. This pseudoscience, radical hygiene theory, of negative eugenics influenced social policy and eugenics-based legislation. One of those was the Immigration Act of 1924, which included segregation laws, sterilization laws, and led to the radical hygiene theory adopted by the Nazis. One of many same organizations that also financially supported Sanger's work was responsible for the Nazi adoption of radical hygiene theory at Kaiser Wilhelm Institute that led to the eugenics implementation of the Holocaust. And the connection between American eugenics and the horrors of Nazi Germany are irrefutable. The preponderance of evidence of where Sanger wanted to go shows the ignorance and naive of eugenics philosophy. The Negro Project was but a precursor to what eugenicists wanted to implement on a much larger scale. And that's funny, because Planned Parenthood never mentions any of these views. Although they honor Margaret Sanger annually with the Maggie Award, they conveniently pick and choose which of her values to publicly celebrate and which to sweep under the rug. They would never consider condemning these twisted ideologies of this woman. However, Sanger's opinions are still apparent today in Planned Parenthood. The true intention of birth control is still deliberately hidden under the guise of women's liberation. Their most recent epitome of this was portrayed when Planned Parenthood built the largest abortion facility in the Western Hemisphere in the center of 4 heavily minority areas. They blatantly showed that they still to this day target minority groups and continue to play out Sanger's intentions for this organization. This hatred of mainly African Americans, which Sanger saw as unfit, continues to influence the culture throughout this race-based abortions. According to the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, despite the recent decline of pregnancy rates in the United States, young women of color continue to be disproportionately affected. And contrary to the public's belief that Planned Parenthood is helpful and supportive of family planning and the health of the mother and the child, recent news and research show the hatred and disdain for minorities that its founder saw as unfit in Sanger's magazine entitled The Birth Control Review. Editor Elmer Carter wrote an article, Eugenics for the Negro, where he stated the race problem in America is infinitely aggravated by the presence of too many unhappy-born, subnormal morons and imbeciles of both races. Therefore, those fighting for birth control must take eugenics into consideration. The belief from the inception of the organization linked directly back to racism and the hatred for people who are not viewed as equal when it comes to family and family values. As Sanger stated in 1922, her advice was the most merciful thing that a family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. African Americans have disproportionately number of abortions according to the population in the United States. African Americans make up 17% of live births. They're having 36% of abortions in the U.S. With this devastating number of abortions, the result is 50% decrease overall of African American population in the United States. The Guttmuncher Institute, the research arm of Planned Parenthood, reports that black women are 4.8 times as likely as non-Hispanic white women to have an abortion, and Hispanic women are only 2.7 times as likely. Could it be that Planned Parenthood is targeting minorities in these communities based on the lifelong agenda of Margaret Sanger? Recently, Planned Parenthood was exposed in its hatred and its racism toward minorities. Leela Rose, 19-year-old sophomore from UCLA and editor of The Advocate, exposed the truth about Planned Parenthood through legally recorded calls to facilities in 7 states, clinics in Ohio, Oklahoma, Idaho, and New Mexico. All have been captured on tape, willfully accepting donations from a donor that designated the money to be spent on a black child. I'm going to play you 2 of these calls. The first one from Ohio. Now, in case you think this one in Ohio is an isolated incident, I'm also going to play you a call made in Oklahoma. Here are these calls.
Hello, this is Irene.
Hi, I'm interested in making a donation today.
Did you want to do it by credit card, or did you want to send in a check?
I'd like to send in a check, hopefully an anonymous check because of the cause. I'd like to send in a check. I'd like to fund 1 abortion.
Okay.
I was wondering if that would be possible.
Yes, we can definitely put that.
Can I make the donation specifically for a minority group?
Like a specific group of color, or like a group of...
I mean, like, I want the abortion to be for an African-American baby.
Okay.
And I was wondering if that could be possible.
The exact amount we charge right now is $450 for an abortion.
Okay, $450.
Mm-hmm. And we can definitely designate it for an African-American.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
2 things. I need your mailing address.
Okay.
I really want to do this, but I don't want to be put on any lists.
Yeah, we would definitely keep your donation anonymous.
Could you provide me with that?
Yeah. It's 719 San Mateo, Northeast. We're divided into quadrants here, so we're northeast, southeast, northwest.
Okay.
And we're northeast, just to make it easy. Albuquerque.
And who should I address that to?
You can put it to my attention.
Should I also put attention to your vice president?
Her name is Roberta Velasquez.
If I wanted to help fund multiple abortions, could you also specify that this could be done for a specific group?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I'm really excited, because I really faced trouble with affirmative action. I don't want my kids to be disadvantaged, against blacks in college, and the less blacks out there, the better. So.
Yeah, it's a strange time for sure.
Yeah.
So, okay. Roberta just came in and she's giving me a list of different prices we charge depending on the week. So, the majority of them are $425.
Thank you so much, and you'll be receiving the check in a few days. I wanted to make a donation.
Oh, okay.
I was wondering if I could talk to somebody, or...
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Let me, have you talked to our VP of Development, and her name is Sue Riggs. Hello, this is Sue. May I help you?
Hi, Sue. I'm interested in making a donation.
Great.
So would it be possible for me to donate that money specifically for these minority groups so that they could have access to abortions?
Yes, it would be.
Wonderful. And could I specify that abortion be done, or those abortions be done for a particular minority group, or how does that work?
If you wish, you can.
Okay. So for example, the black community in Tulsa, would it be possible to give the money specifically for that?
You sure can.
Wonderful. Great. The abortions will be done specifically for the black community abortions.
I will mark it in such a way that definitely it will.
On a black baby?
Yes.
Thank you. Great.
Okay.
So can I give you my credit card number?
Yes.
The fact is that Planned Parenthood has no problem taking money that's earmarked for a specific race. And you know, all of this is self-evident, that African Americans are targeted. And it's self-evident simply by looking around. Look in the city where you live, and if you're in a small town, you've got to be close to a bigger city. Look at where Planned Parenthoods and these health clinics are located. Will you find any of these in the rich, upper-class neighborhoods? No, you won't find one. What about the upper-middle-class neighborhoods? No, you won't find them there. How about in the poor white neighborhoods? Yeah, you'll find a few there. What about in the minority or black neighborhoods? That's where you're going to find the majority of Planned Parenthoods, and you're going to find that they're the biggest, most productive Planned Parenthoods on the face of the earth, because blacks are targeted by Planned Parenthood from the very beginning. And I think going over this history of both eugenics and depopulation and Margaret Sanger from her beginnings proves just exactly that. I think it's important that everybody understand the history of how this came about. And this is not my opinion. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented fact. And also the history of Margaret Sanger is documented fact. Also the numbers of abortions that are perpetrated on African Americans as opposed to anybody else is a documented fact. People need to know and understand that the African American population is being targeted through abortion for depopulation. And you know, for all of you folks who are big fans of Obama, let me tell you this, that through Obamacare, there's a mandate that every portion of Obamacare payments that are made goes to fund Planned Parenthood. Last year, Planned Parenthood received $540 million of taxpayer money. Now, I know it's illegal for taxpayer money to go for abortions, but Planned Parenthood stands in front of Congress and says none of this money is going for abortions, and they're telling the truth. What they do, they take this almost $1.5 million a day, and they pay all of the bills, they pay all of the salaries, they pay the taxes, the light bill. They pay all of this money for the daily bills, and it frees up all of the other money for them to give free contraception and free abortions to any minority that comes in the door. And they tell them when they come in, if you're a minority, we'll give you free contraception. And if you have an accident and accidentally get pregnant, you come in here right away, we'll take care of it for free. They're not doing this because they're kind or sympathetic to minorities. They're doing this because they don't want minorities to reproduce. That's the idea behind this whole thing. Free contraception, free abortions. Come in, we'll take care of it right away because they don't want African Americans to reproduce. You know, one day God will judge the actions of every human being, both living and dead. He will require that all give an account for their lives that He's given us. Will you be one who says that you knew about this genocide of the black population but did nothing to stop it? We have to face the fact everyone is responsible. If you do nothing, you're allowing it. The black community can't stop this by themselves. It's a responsibility of every human being to stop genocide of every sort. And abortion and its targeted racism is a lonely fight that the victims shouldn't have to fight by themselves. If you think you're not affected by this because you're not black, think again. The idea of the elimination of what they call idiots or morons or the people that they deem unfit to reproduce is so pervasive that it doesn't matter now what your skin color is. If you're having kids out of wedlock, or you're poor, or if you don't fit the standards that they have established, then you are also a target. They don't want you to even exist, let alone reproduce. Where does the responsibility lie for ending this genocide? Like I said, the African American community can't do it alone. Government is not going to help you. The values and standards in society are getting worse, not better. It's up to the church, spiritual leaders, to explain and promote the idea of family values and the consequences of this hookup society of today. If we as Americans don't stand up for what's right, this genocide will continue until the population that they deem as unworthy will be gone, or reduced to such a small number that they'll eventually dwindle away, be out of existence. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. This is End Time News. I'm W. Dean Shook. I encourage everyone to share this with everyone you know. You know, this program is downloadable. You can download this program and play it anywhere, anytime. If you have the End Time News app, it's always there in the list. You can always pull it up. There's never a charge for this program. This is absolutely free. Download it. Share it with everyone you know. Everyone needs to know the history of this agenda and how it's perpetrated on minorities specifically. Thank you for joining me. My email is contact@wdeanshook.com. The webpage is wdeanshook.com. Twitter is wdeanshook. Join me on Twitter. Facebook is also wdeanshook. And download the new End Time News mobile app at the Google Store and never miss another episode today. Your comments are welcomed. You can email me, like I said, at contact@wdeanshook.com. So until our next episode, when the dust settles and the smoke clears, I'll see you then. Thank you very much.
You can get these full stories and more at wdeanshook.com. That's wdeanshook.com.